Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Bjorn, and in this video we delve deep into the history of one of the most fascinating weapons of the Middle Ages and the early modern period, the Bardiche. Join me on a journey through time as we explore the origins, development and diverse uses of this impressive weapon. The history of the Bardiche likely begins with the Scandinavian Battleaxe, a weapon used by the Vikings in the early Middle Ages. This battleaxe was known for its efficiency in battle and its robust construction. Over time, various weapons, including the Bardiche, evolved from this basic shape. This evolution was driven by technological advancements and the need for more specialized weapons for different warfare scenarios. The Vikings had trade relations from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, so the long Dana axe of the Vikings may have been passed on to the Eastern European regions by the Scandinavians and then adapted and developed into the Bardiche. However, we are primarily talking about the early Middle Ages when we discuss the Vikings and their armament. The first pictorial evidence of an axe in the form of the so-called Bardiche appears in the early 13th century of the High Middle Ages and mainly in Central European sources, not as expected in the Eastern European regions. The entire development is therefore very vague and difficult to trace. What can be said is that the long-handled battle axe is gradually transformed into more versatile versions by the mid-13th century, possibly even earlier. We are talking about early versions of the halberd, the glaive and the Bardiche presented here. Although contemporary images first appear in French, English and German regions, the axe was certainly already widespread in Eastern Europe and had become a popular weapon there by the 16th century at the latest. The term Bardiche was probably also spread and established at this time. Earlier versions from the 13th to 15th century could technically be considered as early types, like early relatives of the axe family tree. But even as the Bardiche evolved into a specialized weapon over generations, we want to look at this type in its entirety and especially explore its martial aspects. In short, I have made attempts to see how this type of axe could be used effectively in a combat situation. In the High and Late Middle Ages, the Bardiche was mainly used as a close combat weapon for infantrymen. Its long reach and the ability to both hack and stab made it an effective weapon against armored opponents. But it was also ideal for sieges and assaults, as the axe could also be used as a tool, as evidenced by some contemporary images. Axes and similar chopping weapons are often seen as preferred weapons of attackers on assault ladders, but also on the defending side on the walls. Probably for two reasons. Firstly, climbing an assault ladder is difficult under constant bombardment with stones and other things. An axe can provide extra support or serve as a climbing aid by hooking the axe blade into the ladder rungs, which is not possible with a sword, right? And on the other hand, on the defender's side, the heavy siege equipment can be more easily damaged, ropes cut, etc. Admittedly, these are only assumptions, but it seems logical to me to arm troops with tools during sieges. And it is very practical if these also serve as weapons. There are also a few pictorial sources of cavalrymen wielding this weapon against their opponents, but however, I think this was rather the exception. In the early modern period, the Bardiche was also used in ceremonial occasions and as a symbol of authority, especially in Eastern Europe, while this position was mainly taken by the halberd in Central Europe. We particularly remember all the beautiful halberds of the 16th and 17th century. In Russia, some variants of the Bardiche were specifically designed to use by guard units and special troops who carried them at parades and other official events. Until the 19th century, the Bardiche remained a symbol of military strength and traditional here, although it was increasingly replaced by firearms and other modern weapons. However, before this happened and the Bardiche disappeared from the battlefield, it was used together with rifles and served as a rifle rest. So what did this weapon look like? Well, this question is hard to answer because, as already mentioned, this axe weapon was used for many centuries. However, there are a few specific characteristics that define a Bardiche. The Bardiche is characterized by its long curved blade attached to the shaft at its lower end. This weapon was somewhere between 120 and 170 centimeters long, with the blade averaging about 70 centimeters. The unique shape of the blade allowed for both slashing and thrusting, making the Bardiche a versatile weapon on the battlefield. The decorative elements on the shaft and the blade were not only aesthetically pleasing, but also served to mark the weapon as a status symbol. Depending on the area of application, the dimensions could vary greatly. In the Middle Ages, the weapon was still purely a close combat weapon, while in the early modern period, its use shifted to a hybrid of weapon and rifle rest, resulting in a very precise length measure. In the latter period, there are references to leather straps that allowed the shooter to position the Bardiche on their back after a shot. This specialization was ideal for shooting within the formation, as it allowed the ranks of soldiers to rotate quickly through the uncomplicated storage of the weapon. By this time, a spike at the lower end had also been established to provide the shooter with a stable, non-slip support. This development was, so to speak, the final stage of this axe type, from a simple but versatile long-handled axe for close combat to a specialized weapon for formation combat, adapted to the needs of a military rifle unit. In the end, this relatively inexpensive weapon supported the entire process of drilled soldiers and their routines, and thus became an essential part of the Eastern European battle tactics. Now let's move on to the handling of the weapon. This is the part that is the most fun. Doing research is interesting, but moving is simply more enjoyable. As you all have surely noticed, I prefer to show techniques and move in front of the camera rather than just sitting in a chair and talking. But it is really important to engage with the context of a weapon before focusing on its application. So we can't avoid relaxing and listening from time to time before we get to the action, because this helps us better understand the usefulness. Could be worse, right? Basically, the grip style of the Bardiche is quite unique. It immediately reminds me of that of a halberd on one hand, but also of the half-sword grip for longsword. And here we come to a first important point. Many of you have surely noticed that I grip all my pole arms with my left hand in front, but single-handed weapons or the longsword with my right. I picked up this handling from Joachim Meyer's fencing book from 1570. Unfortunately, he does not explain why he always grips pole arms with the left hand in front, so I made my own thoughts about it. After going through all the pieces and techniques from the fencing book, it quickly became clear to me. The dominant hand, i.e. the hand with which the weapon is aimed and which is mainly in control of the weapon, is located on the back of the pole arm. Just take a spear or a pole in hand. You will notice that when you aim the weapon for a thrust, the back hand does this. Even if you wanted to thrust one-handed with long weapon, it is better if your dominant hand stays on the weapon's end. Also with half sword, the right hand is at the back, the front supports, and together this provides excellent stability and accuracy in the thrust. The Bardiche here is a kind of hybrid between a pole arm and a long, let's say half sword, I think. You can certainly slash with the right hand in front, but as soon as you switch grips, the left hand is in front for the aimed thrust. Additionally, a thumb rest towards the target helps enormously. Just try it with and without the thumb. The grip change is really quick to implement with this weapon because it is by no means as top heavy as a halberd, more like with a pole axe. Therefore, it is worth practicing all grip styles, no matter which hand is in front. But if you want to shoot forward one-handed, it is worth doing this with the right hand at the back. In addition, half or full cuts are possible. Here I prefer to cut where the leg is not in front. This gives more power in the cut and ensures stability in the stance. A full strike around also does its job, either in a circle around the head, but also in conjunction with a hand switch. The latter can be done in two ways, much like the rest cut with the halberd. Thrusts are generally very powerful, especially from the button to top with the curved spike, but the range is miserable. Therefore, I recommend a thrust especially immediately after a cut. And I always say stay smooth. Maintaining the dynamic is enormously important to give the opponent no opportunity for a counter-strike. By the way, I know of no original source on the Bardiche, so about handling etc. At the time of the documentation of martial arts around 3000, this weapon was already in use, but there are no sources references to it. Moreover, the weapon underwent a strong transformation, and as already mentioned, there were hardly any standards in size and shape, except for a few important features. Nevertheless, I orient myself on my learned basic concepts of martial arts and the teachings of Lichtenauer, which can give us an idea of how such a weapon was used. Therefore, I will not go into stances in particular, but what is suitable are a middle and a high stance with two rather defensive variants. All can be held both on the shaft and in the half sword. Another peculiarity is the use of the Bardiche together with a small fist shield, the buckler. There are indeed pictorial sources for this, and I must say it works really well. As long as the handle of the shield is not too thick, or maybe even a thick rope, you can wonderfully use the buckler together with the Bardiche. Even switching grips poses no major problems. What I cannot recommend is using the buckler and the axe one-handed. I mean, it is obvious, it's just too heavy. The Bardiche gives me real problems swinging here. My dear ones, we come to the end. Overall, this weapon shines through its versatile applicability and simple construction. The handling is comparatively simple and straightforward, making it an ideal weapon for military units, even without specialized training. Alright, so if you like videos like this, please leave a sub or a like. Many more videos like this will follow. Take care and see you next time. Your Björn.